Good evening, everybody. First, let me say thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it. I really didn't expect this great of a turnout, so I'm much appreciated about that. I have to say thank you to some of my colleagues that I see that are here because I know they worked long days today and they decided to come support this discussion. So Dr. Cantwell, Dr. Matthews, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. I want to start out before I introduce our panelists. We have a very distinct panel, as you can see. But I want to start to share with you a little bit why I felt this panel was necessary and this discussion was necessary. Because for one, as we know, if you've been living, unless you've been living in a cave, you are very familiar with what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. You're very familiar with what happened to Trayvon Martin. You're very familiar with what happened to Jordan Davis. And the African American community, there was a lot of tension between the African American community, law enforcement, and criminal justice right now. And that's putting it lightly. This discussion and this topic is very personal for me because when I was 7 years old, my father was shot and murdered. When I was 21 years old, my brother was shot and murdered. My brother had just turned 23. He had a 6-month-old son, and his son is 23 years old today. He lives in Chicago, Illinois, and quite often he would call me a couple years ago and tell me, you know, Uncle, I feel like my life will not be long. I've seen many of my friends brutalized by the police. I've seen a few of my friends shot by law enforcement. And it was very hard for me to not wait to get that phone call that something happened to my nephew. He left Chicago, thankfully, and moved to Iowa, where he got a very good job. But he recently has moved back to Chicago because of some family issues. So now he's back in that situation that he tried to get away from. So again, that fear is there. I also have a godson who lives in Oakland, California, who's 21 years old. And again, he has called and asked if he could come live with me on certain occasions because he felt like he also was going to end up a statistic and not have an opportunity to live a full and productive life because he had also seen some of his friends who have gone down the wrong path, have gotten in trouble, and their lives are cut very short. So for me, again, it's personal, and I just feel like it is long overdue. And the last reason is because I have quite a few students in my class who often get into discussions about race. That discussion therefore leads to a discussion about racial profiling. One of my students in particular just the other day told me that they do not like and they do not trust the police. Now, let's think about this in the scope of this whole discussion. When someone says they do not like someone, they do not trust someone, it's very easy at that point to not respect that person. When you don't respect someone, particularly a person in a position of authority, it's very easy to understand how that situation or that interaction could magnify into something terrible, right? So I felt like on top of my personal issues, now I have African American males in my class who are also having issues or feeling a certain way about law enforcement. There was no way I could not say something or do something. So hopefully some of them are here tonight. I do see a few. But I hope that this panel, my hope and goal of this panel is that we have a distinct panel of experts who will hopefully give us some understanding, some insight into what we can do, particularly as African American community, African American men, how we should deal with law enforcement, what we should take away from this conversation, and also understand the other side of it. What is it that the media allows for us to see when it comes to high-profile cases? Because as a communication scholar, my job is to look into what the media puts out, what images, what messages are they putting out to us. And we, as consumers of that media, we need to be a little bit more critical of what we're seeing. They cannot always show us and tell us everything that's going on in the case. They can only give us glimpses into that case. So we are left as a consumer to spin and make up our own conclusion, right? We do that without having all of the information sometimes. Now, if you side with a certain person or a certain situation that you're seeing in the media, and then you're getting glimpses into the media of that case, you're more likely to side with something that you've seen that fits your personality or your belief system. That in itself could be a problem. So to help me, hopefully, bring this discussion full circle, I want to introduce our panel, and I'm going to ask each of them to give us a little bit of their background and why they think this discussion is important. First, Dr. McMorris, who is a professor here at MGC.
I'm Dr. Michael McMorris, and I'm Professor of Criminal Justice and Program Coordinator. I'll give you just a tiny bit of my background so we can move ahead. I'm a native Detroiter. I've been here for 2 years. This is my second year at MGSC, but not my first time here in Georgia. I actually served here as a Special Agent for U.S. Customs back 1993 through 95. My career over the last 31 years has been in law enforcement. I've either taught or practiced law enforcement at the local level or the federal level, as well as being a full-time professor and instructor for police academy students, as well as in Beijing, China, and other places. This discussion is very important to me because we are seeing the same kinds of patterns now, and we're in 2014 that we saw years and years ago, back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and even before that. So it's very important for me to get this information out to you guys so we can start a dialogue and we can start the healing process, as well as do some things that can actually prevent certain kinds of things from happening to us, I'm talking about us as a country.
Next we have Dr.Adria Goldman from Portland State. Dr. Goldman is Assistant Professor of Communications.
My background, my PhD is in mass communication and media studies, and I specifically research groups in different media representation, specifically groups who have been underrepresented in the past. The reason why I was very excited about this panel is because, as Dr. Nicholson was mentioning, we are media consumers, but we are not passive media consumers. We are active media consumers, and one thing that we have to do is be willing to discuss the issues that media presents to us, and this is part of that process, coming together, hearing from people with different backgrounds and being able to discuss this topic and not just solely going off of what we see in the media.
Okay. And next we have Sheriff of Bibb County, Sheriff David Davis.
I'm Sheriff David Davis. I'm proud to be here and glad that we're having this discussion. And I think that in my job as being the sheriff and in law enforcement, and since we're a consolidated agency, all of the law enforcement falls to the sheriff's office here in this community. We are the practitioners. We're the front lines. We're the ones who are going to respond to any type of disturbance or any kind of issue that comes up in our community. So it's very important that we engage in the community and that we come and that we establish the dialogue to let you know what our position is and to let you know that we are here to keep that dialogue going, to keep that partnership and relationship going with our community, to address any concerns that you have, and also sort of explain why we do what we do sometimes. I think there's some misunderstandings about why law enforcement has to operate the way they do. So we want to keep that dialogue open and also find out what's happening in the community so that you can help us be the eyes and ears of what's happening and have a trusting relationship so that when you know if you call or you know you have an issue that we're going to be there and solve that problem for you. So thank you.
Sure. Next we have Mr. Charles Richardson from the Telegraph.
I think this conversation is important for a couple of reasons. One, relationships need to be created between different members of the community, whether it be law enforcement and the community or whatever, long before you have an issue. Because if you have an issue and I've not met Sheriff Davis, well then he's a stranger to me. But if I know him as I know him, a whole different set of things come into view. I grew up in Watts in California. I know what being stopped on the street is like. Some of it my fault, some of it they just didn't think I should be driving the car I was driving. But I think I've learned in my 63 years how to survive, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that this evening.
Yes, thank you very much, man. So how I would like this to work is I have a set of questions I'm going to pose to the panel, but also it's open for the audience as well. If you have a question or comment that you would like to make at any time, please feel free to raise your hand and do so. Okay? Only I ask that you keep your comments kind of short because we are on limited time. I know some people can be long-winded, so I will pose the first question to our sheriff, if you don't mind. Sheriff, as you know, the credibility of our law enforcement has taken a hit in the eyes of the public, particularly with the African American community. Do you think it's justified, or do you think the media has portrayed law enforcement in a bad light overall?
Well, I think in some cases it's probably justified. I can speak for our community here. We engage a good relationship with the media and with the public here to get our message out and to get public input as to what we're doing. Every community is different. I think we try to do it right here. I think you're right. I think in some instances nationwide, and some of the coverages that we've seen in Missouri or even in any other town, when law enforcement engages with the citizens and there's a bad outcome, there's an outcome where law enforcement's had to use some type of force, the very first story that you get is officer shoots person, officer assaults person, and all like that. And then later on, all the facts come out and you get a little bit clearer picture. So I think in some ways, the media does play a part nationally. I think here locally, we get a little bit more even keel on what happens here. So yeah, I do think that it can be some concerning, and certainly when you hear that over and over again, even when you hear it on a national level, you're going to bring that down to the local level and figure if they're like that in another city, if they're like that in New York, Los Angeles, or somewhere, they could be like that here, because people see law enforcement as law enforcement. Most of the time, people are not. They don't have a reason to engage with law enforcement in their normal day-to-day lives. So they see what something's on TV may happen 1,000 miles away from here, but they relate it to locally. So in some ways, yes.
All right, Mr. Bishop, I'm going to pose that same question to you on the opposite side, who is someone in the media.
Well, I think the first thing you have to understand is it's very difficult to parachute in a community and understand that community. But there's not much understanding, as in Ferguson, Missouri. If you've got police moving forward on a group of people in military-style equipment and uniform, that the picture tells 1,000 words. You know, you don't have to understand that. But what you do have to try to understand is what created that situation. And you have to go far beyond what happened on the day that Michael Brown was shot. You need to find out what's going on in that community. That's very difficult for an outsider to do. I've done that in the past, dropping into Boston during school segregation or integration. Almost got myself killed. But you have to work hard to try to tell the story of what's going on there. But it's very difficult to understand.
Dr. Goldman, as we know, much of what we learn about what's going on in the world is through the lens of the media. What role do you think the media plays in how cases such as Michael Brown in Ferguson, Trayvon Martin in Florida, or other high-profile cases are perceived by viewers?
Well, in the communication field, one of the theories that we consider when looking at media representations is agenda setting. And news especially, they have this power to set the agenda for the public. They let us know what we should discuss. Now with those cases, what was really interesting is that we can't just consider the news media, we have to also consider the role of social media, because it was social media that really helped to push those cases to the forefront. I do think it has impacted perceptions of police officers as well as perceptions of the African American community, because of not only will media set the agenda, but oftentimes they will frame the story in a specific way. So when we see different pictures, when we see different keywords, when we see different phrases, when we see different types of quotes, it's shifting the way that we think about those different issues. And when I remember going back and looking at a lot of the different coverage, and you had media on both sides. I'm pro this side, I'm pro police officers, I'm going to bash this side, I'm going to bash police officers. So that will set the agenda and often impact the way that the consumers look at this issue of, it's us versus them mentality.
And let's tackle something a little tougher here. What do you guys think about racial profiling? Does it happen?
Of course it happens. Quite frankly, we all profile. If someone approaches us on the street and they're sagging, got dreads, flashing colors, what you gonna think? I mean, it just is. we have a natural human instinct to fight or flee. And we try to size up things, sometimes wrongly, that might impact our existence. But of course, there is racial profiling on a number of different levels.
Other panel?
That's still open for you?
Yes.
Very clearly that the idea of racial profiling and criminal profiling oftentimes get mixed up. Some people think that when you talk about racial profiling, you're also talking about criminal profiling, and you're not. They're two separate, totally different things. Criminal profiling deals with a law enforcement effort to capture a particular snapshot of an individual who's committed a particular kind of crime and put together a profile so it's easier, not necessarily easy, but easier to prevent this kind of person from moving about in society and from perpetrating crimes on other people. But at the same time, it becomes easier for them to do their job, like I said, them, law enforcement, when they have the help of the community. So it's criminal profiling that we look at certain characteristics of a certain suspect type. The difference between that and racial profiling is huge. Racial profiling deals with a person who has a preconceived notion, not necessarily a fact at hand, but a preconceived notion about what a type of person based on race is capable of doing, what this person is capable of doing just because this person is a certain color. For example, if you happen to be driving your vehicle on the road late at night and you're speeding and you're pulled over by a police officer, you know that you're speeding. The police officer knows that you're speeding. But the difference comes into play when the officer begins to address you. If he or she addresses you in this way, then you know there's a problem. Where is your weapons? How many weapons do you have in your car? Where are the drugs? Officer, why'd you stop me? Step out of the car. But officer, I didn't do anything. Why'd you step out of the car? The officer never got to the point of you speeding, which was the initial violation, which he or she should have done, right? But what we typically have seen, and you can look at some of the research over the last 15, 20 years, when this whole idea about racial profiling came out, a lot of our landmark cases come from Maryland, they come from New Jersey. These are some of the first cases. This happens to be one of my areas of expertise when we look at police training, and you go back really far and see what was happening in these different cities and these different states with police training. But this idea of racial profiling has been around for a very long time, But I do think that people are confused, particularly citizens are confused with the police effort. Again, it's not in our minds. When I say our, I'm talking about police officers. Because someone told me years ago, Mike, once a cop, always a cop. Okay, I'll take that, right? When I hired into the police department back in 1985, I had my eyes wide open, being a person from the city of Detroit, watching people pummeled and brutalized during the riots in the 1960s, the late 1960s as a young boy. But I also remember looking at how I could probably do something about it if either I was wearing a uniform or if I were wearing a judge's robes. So I decided at that point, I believe I was about 4 or 5 years old, that I would do something in this particular career. So I started looking into criminal justice as a major, long before I even knew anything about college, so to speak. But I remember seeing people in my neighborhood brutalized in the city of Detroit by a unit there called the Big Four. That was their street name. Their name on the police department was Stress. But it really bugged me to the point where I knew I wanted to do something about it, so I started my journey then. I knew that once I graduated from college, I would go into law enforcement and then into federal law enforcement and be able to make a difference, make a change. Because I didn't want to see what happened to people in my neighborhood, people that I love, happen to anybody else.
Sheriff Davis, just kind of follow to what Dr. McMorris just mentioned, the training that police officers get. So one of the big topics and issues in the media is deadly force, the use of deadly force. So I was wondering if you could explain to us what that means exactly and how our officers train that split decision.
Sure. Let me, before I say that, can I address one thing about the profiling? And you know, every one of us, whether we admit it or not, has some prejudice, has some things. Some people like chocolate ice cream, some people like vanilla, some people like strawberry, whatever, you know, that that you might like. But one of the things that really helps that in law enforcement that I have seen is that the paradigm has shifted so much, and there's so much diversity now in law enforcement, especially, I speak now in the South. I was born and raised here in Macon, been at the sheriff's office for 35 years, so I can show you the change and the shifts. So when you have a diverse force like we have now, someone may be involved in that, but their riding partner may be of a different race, a different gender. They're gonna pick it up. It's being, as somebody says, if the classroom polices itself, they're gonna watch each other, and that sort of thing will be identified and brought to forward. So having a diverse force that they look out for each other and keep that down seems to help. Now, going to the use of force issue, yes, we have use of force policy. I have brought a copy here with me tonight. It's about 10 pages long. It covers every kind of aspect, and our officers are trained on that. By the law, we have to have training every year on use of force, judgmental use, when you can shoot, when not shoot. That's part of our qualifications course that you have to show propensity with the firearm. So we do that every year. Anytime use of force is done, there's a use of force report that is filled out and forwarded up to our records and through our investigation. Our internal affairs people investigates all use of force uses. So there's so many layers of review in cases of use of force that we follow the policy. As large as we are and as professional as we try to be, we want to make sure of that. Another thing that we do, we have outside review. Since I became sheriff, especially since we merged, anytime one of our officers has to use deadly force or use deadly force, whether death results in it or not, but that they discharge their weapon and someone is injured, we get the GBI to come in and do the investigation on it. It brings an independent outside investigation into it to follow our policy. We do an internal affairs investigation at the same time to see if policy was violated. Then it's turned over to the district attorney, and then it's followed through like that. And at any point of that, once the investigation is through, and as we go through, we want to be transparent with that and let people know what happened, why what happened, and then if there's any questions, we want to try to resolve.
This question is for all panelists, actually. How do you feel about the way the media actually portrays these high-profile cases? And in their portrayal, does it do a disservice to the consumers of the media?
Well, I want to tie back to what I was talking about earlier about the framing of different situations in the media. A lot of media, they were not objective in their presentation of the facts of cases such as Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown. And one of the issues with that is that, again, it was putting two sides against each other. One of the things that was important about these different cases, in mass communication, they call it the protest paradigm. So one of the things that they were saying is that after these incidents and people came together and they wanted to, have their voices heard, so on and so forth, the focus of the story shift for several media outlets. So for example, I'm going through some of the headlines, and some people are starting to research this already, the words that were used and the focus on, now it's no longer this person was shot, we're going to focus on these details, but it's, okay, it's a mob going on, it's a riot going on right now, the cops are going after this person. So some of the media coverage, for me, one of the issues was it was kind of shifting the focus. And again, it was painting two sides against each other rather than really focusing on the facts at hand. And this is not to say that some media outlets did not do that. As I was going through looking at different things, like I said, a lot of scholars are coming together comparing different headlines, so on and so forth. And some people did present those facts objectively, but a lot of the headlines that I was seeing, it seemed to shift the focus. It was kind of like we have to sensationalize this issue. Let's focus on the violence. Let's focus on the negative aspects of it. And I feel like that was highlighted, which again can set the agenda and frame the way that we think about these different topics.
Mr. Richardson, can you talk about that?
Well, I think it's very easy to lose focus. To give an example, Michael Brown shot in the street. All of a sudden, the video comes out that he may have rousted a convenience. So the focus shifts from Michael Brown getting shot in the street to the convenience store. With Trayvon Martin, it shifts again. Okay, he got suspended from school, maybe smoked some weed. But that really has nothing to do with what happened that night that he was killed. So you lose that focus. In order to try not to do that, I think the print media does a better job of that than the broadcast media. Because basically we're not on a 24-hour news cycle. But now, yes, we are on the 24-hour news cycle. So it gives us a little more time to start considering those things and what's important. The media, everybody's trying to beat everybody. And unfortunately, most times when that race is run, everybody loses.
Can I add something, just piggybacking off of what you said? I meant to mention this earlier when you talked about how they were really focusing on how he robbed the convenience store. And a lot of research is also looking at, when we think about words, our words are symbols, right? And those symbols are very powerful. So even our choice of words when we write or whenever we speak, it communicates a different message. So, for example, one scholar came forward and they were really looking at, okay, if you want to present this fact, you feel that this is a fact that's supposed to be a part of the story, but even the way that people would stress the word rob versus steal and how those two words were discussed. He robbed this person, they were victimized, versus he stole this one thing and they were moving on to the next. So even the use of our words, the way that we're discussing the same fact can, again, paint us against each other and go back to that fight that seems to sell, unfortunately.
As I was looking into this topic, I started doing some research myself actually, and came across, or tried to actually come across some numbers, because one of the things that people like to say is there are no more black men being killed by white officers than there are white men. So I did some research to find out about that, and I'd like for Dr. Moore to touch on that if you can, because if I'm not mistaken, there really are no hard facts to tell us what those numbers are, correct?
Yes, let me, I want to speak to that in general, but then I'm going to give you something very specific. There are disproportionate numbers of men of color, particularly African American men, who are shot, who are killed, who are vilified in the media, but who are taken advantage of in our CJ system. And I don't say that to be mean-spirited toward police officers, because that's where my heart is. My heart has always been in law enforcement, always will be. But if I look at the facts, and we're talking about black men, African American men being killed in disproportionate numbers, let's take a step back, and I'm sure that some of my colleagues here who are in uniform and those who are not police officers will probably be shocked by this if they haven't already heard of this. And this is something that happened a little bit ago. For one of my classes, I tend to show a great deal of media, and some of that media deals with police officers and what we call friendly fire incidents. You also have a lot of that happening in the military. A friendly fire incident is when a person who is a police officer is accidentally shot by his fellow officer. In the military, it's the same thing. A soldier is shot by another soldier. It's totally an accident, right? It's a friendly fire incident. One of the issues that pops up in my mind that came out as a documentary on a news show happened in the city of New York. This was a number of years ago, but I will bring it up to you because it's still very important. Police officers shot in the city of New York by other police officers. Back, I believe it was in the early 1990s. We had Officer Desmond Robertson. He was shot 5 times in the back. He was on duty, plain clothes, working on the subway trains, right? He was shot by an officer who was off duty named Peter Del Devio. Peter Del Devio shot Officer Robertson 5 times in the back. Right? There's a big controversy as to whether or not Officer Robertson was running towards this person, the other person who was off duty, Del Devio, or whether he was already past him on the subway train when he was shot. Long story made short, a retired detective for the New York City Police Department, his name is Roger Abel, he did some research, and he wanted to check and see this department that he worked for, that he loved for many years and that he retired from. He wanted to see if there were any incidents of shootings that occurred where there were black police officers who shot white police officers. Now, our topic is black males being shot. This is black police officers being shot by white police officers. His research over a 50-year period showed that 24 black police officers were shot by white police officers, their white counterparts. These guys were either on duty or off duty, and he looked at the same number of years, and he found that not one white police officer was ever shot by a black police officer in a friendly fire incident. Now, for some people, that's, oh, well, that doesn't really sound like it could possibly be true, but please do your own research. You can find that out yourself. If we go up a little bit further north and east into Providence, Rhode Island, we had a police officer named Cornell Young Jr. He was shot and killed by police officers in supposedly a friendly fire incident where he was trying to intervene while he was off duty, but he was shot and killed by two officers, one of the officers he attended the police academy with. Very interesting situation. So we talk about black males being shot and killed by the police. We're looking at black police officers being in jeopardy. During the time that I was a police officer, I did work undercover. During the time I was a federal agent, I did work undercover. And it was extremely, extremely dangerous. Very much so. It's nothing like having someone that you know pointing a gun at your face. I can tell you that right now. It's very, very frustrating. It's very, it makes you get really emotional, right? It makes you get really emotional. So when we talk about black males, I just want to bring it back to law enforcement officers who are shot. But the numbers are out there. You guys, you can do your own research on that. A lot of people like to look at the internet, but there's more information that's not on the internet than what is on the internet. So do your research on that. You'll find the numbers do exist.
As I mentioned when we first started, that there's a lot of tension in the African American community about this topic. So I kind of want to find out from the sheriff in particular, and Ms. Richardson, do you think that the African American community bears any responsibility in this whole situation, this whole topic?
Well, let me ask the audience a question. How many of you, when you wake up in the morning, wake up thinking that you're white or black? White folks, do you have to get up in the morning thinking about whether you're white or not? Black folks, when you get up in the morning, do you think about whether you're white or black? Raise your hand if you don't, that's a good thing. But I will tell you that every day of my life, my mother had always warned me, you cannot do the same things that maybe some of your friends down the street can do. She always taught me to protect myself. And with police officers, there's two things that I can say. Yes, sir. No, sir. Don't get in any arguments with it. I don't, yes, sir. No, sir. Some of the officers in here know that I have a pretty heavy foot. So I've had occasion to be stopped by a few of them. Yes, sir. No, sir. I knew I was speeding. So as far as a community, I think you have to understand that you have to take responsibility for yourself and your actions. I am no threat and have never been to a police officer. But I also remember a young man in the 70s by the name of Richard Pryor who said, I am reaching into my jacket to get my wallet, because those kinds of accidents go on all the time. So I think it's not fair, but it is what it is. You have to conduct yourself accordingly. And is that the community responsibility? I think it's an individual responsibility.
Let me just piggyback a tiny bit on what you said. I know that some of us in the room are in our 50s and over, and we can look back to those times when we were told to be careful what you say and what you do. And having seen people taken advantage of by the police, which is what made me get into criminal justice in the first place, it still bothers me to this day when I am stopped, not because I'm speeding and I know I'm speeding, but it bothers me because I don't know if I'm going to be able to walk away from that particular encounter. Even though for a number of years I carried a gun and a badge at the federal level and at the local level, I am still bothered by that thought that maybe this would be the one police officer who does not necessarily want to see me leave that encounter. I know all too well how easy it is very much so. For a person to, and I'm going to give you this statement, you see what I'm talking about. For a person to have his or her fingerprints placed on a weapon, right, that they did not own, did not see before they met the police officer. I know all too well. I know of incidents that have happened. I also know of incidents that have happened where a person's fingerprints ended up on drugs that the person had never seen before they met that officer. Now, that's not to say that we should look at all of law enforcement with a jaundiced eye or through a jaundiced eye. Law enforcement is a very proud profession. It is something that I, of course, love, but it's also something that has minute numbers of people who should not be in uniform and should not be trusted with those badges and guns. Very small numbers, but one incident can blow it all out of proportion, then all of a sudden, all of the law enforcement officers are wrong, all of them are dirty, all of them are corrupt, all of them are racist, and that is not the case. But there are a few bad apples, and they should be taken right off of the streets. During the time that I trained police officers for 10 years at Ferris State University, it was always an interesting discussion that we would have in the police academy classes. One thing that the officers or the officer candidates would say, and they would hear this from other people that they knew who were police officers, they would always come up with this statement, and it bugged the crap out of me. They would say, in real life, when we get out of here, I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Meaning they're going to shoot first and ask questions later. And because I was their instructor, I tried to get them to see the other side of that. You can't take that approach, right? Because they're not our enemy. It's not the us versus them mentality, which is actually called the police worldview. We should never take that approach. We actually are trusted with the gun and the badge to take care of and to protect and serve. But there is an existence of a blue wall of silence. I'm not going to lie and say there is not. There is an existence of a police subculture, right? There is an existence of a double standard. If I could do this really quickly too, because someone mentioned, they mentioned Trayvon Martin earlier. How many of the ladies here in the audience are pretty much secure that you can take care of yourself in an encounter with someone, with a stranger? You raise your hands, ladies. Take care of yourself if there's a strange situation, right? If we reverse that situation with Trayvon Martin, and it would have been a young lady who had come home from grabbing some snacks at a store, and this person, a stranger, was following her. The stranger gets out of his vehicle and stalks this person down, stalks the young lady down, gets into an altercation, and the young lady beat the crap out of him, and then he shot the young lady. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about Trayvon Martin because that would not have been allowed to happen to a young lady. But because it was a young man, it's a little bit different because there's a double standard, but also we lack imagination in this country. We can't possibly imagine that something like that would happen to us. If it had been a young lady, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now.
Mr. Davis, this is really important to me for particularly my young male students. What would you tell them, or what guidance would you give them in their interaction with police officers? If they're stopped by a police officer, what should they, we could be hot-headed at that young age. What should we do?
Well, as anybody, it's attitude on both sides. We talk about all of the egregious things that law enforcement has done over the years, and there have been some terrible things. There have been bad things, even more recently, that law enforcement has done. That's where training, accountability by the law enforcement executives that are in place to make sure that their officers are trained right and that any wrongdoing is not tolerated, it's investigated and handled. But any encounter with law enforcement, certainly, be calm. The deputy or law enforcement, he's going to say, your driver's license, this, what are you doing here? And you want to keep an even keel and a calm demeanor. In your mind, you might be saying, this joker's hassling me, I'm whatever. And especially if it's in the middle of the night or somewhere in a dangerous place. Calm, treat the law enforcement person like you would any other person that you might encounter. Be respectful. Treat him like I want my people to treat a civilian or a person on the street. be respectful, answer the questions clearly. If you have questions of him, sir, why are you stopping me? They're supposed to answer that question. And if there's any doubt of any kind of wrongdoing, and you feel like something's out of the way, there's avenues to address that. We have ways in our office to address those things. So treat the deputy or treat the officer like you would want to be treated, and be professional and follow the directions. And see, it's very hard for me as an old white guy that grew up here in the South and has seen the paradigms, and I understand the concerns of minorities, African Americans. That I've seen Charles write about the talk, and I've learned about that. And as being a person, a white person like me, for better or for worse in this country, that is not something that my parents had to have with me, unfortunately. I hope that the day comes that we never have to have that talk, but it's a reality. That's the way it is. And so we have to put ourselves in that position and understand, as a white officer, you need to understand why a person who looks different from you may think that you may be up to something, or maybe that you're out to get them. Whereas a white officer or a white person needs to understand when an African American person approaches them, they're not coming up to you to rob you every time this. And every person that you stop has not just robbed the store up the street. So that's where training and conversations like this help to bridge that in our community.
I have two more questions for our panel, and this is for all of you, and I'll open it up for the audience if you have questions. But we live in a technology world now. Do you think that the use of technology helps or hinders criminal investigations?
It helps tremendously. I mean, we have gone from fingerprint dust. Now we can dust something, we can run it through a machine and have someone identified in no time. In fact, we have not much bigger than this recorder that put the fingerprint on, we know who the person is instantly. Technology has come a long way. Cameras, recording equipment, all of that stuff. But we can be enslaved by that some way. We can think that, okay, this technology is going to solve this crime. This technology is going to make our jobs easier. This technology is going to be the panacea for all ills. But you have to know how the technology works. You have to know how it works right, and you have to have people who are committed to input the data, to work with the technology that you have. Sometimes it can hurt you as much as it can help. We talk about cameras. Cameras are great things. We work with that technology. The dash cams in the patrol cars have been great. They have helped officers. They've helped get a clear picture of what happens at a crime scene. So yes, technology happens, but you have to know how to work it and have people there that are up on it and can carry on.
Dr. Goldman?
Well, I can't really speak in terms of technology and actual criminal investigation, but when you first mentioned the question, the first thing I thought about was the role of social media, especially when, a lot of people were having the campaigns. You saw so many hashtags, and they wanted to draw attention, and they wanted the police to act, and so on and so forth. So, of course, I can't say, okay, this is what definitely led to these charges. The public outcry on Twitter led to these charges. No, but I'm saying that I do think technology helped in saying this is a concern. Presenting it to everyone involved, not just police, but everyone involved. This is a concern. And the main thing I'm thinking about is the Trayvon case, when everyone was saying we want to see something done, and technology, social media helped to voice their opinion on that. Mr. Richardson?
Well, I think technology is a tool that can be used for good or ill. And I think sometimes we've watched too many movies. And we think that, reality TV is one instance. How many of you believe that reality TV is really reality? It takes a good TV crew about an hour and a half to set up a shot. When you're shooting with your camera or whatever, it's only seeing this. It's not seeing this. So back to what the sheriff said, you have to have committed individuals to use the tool right, or else that hammer that you have might come down on your thumb.
Let me add this. How many of you folks in the audience have a cell phone? Mine's a little old. How many have like a smartphone? Might have something much better than this. I haven't seen anything like that. What I think technology has done for the average citizen is it has placed that citizen in a position where he or she can also help in an investigative capacity, right? Because law enforcement officers cannot do their jobs at all unless they have the cooperation of the community. And oftentimes you will see YouTube videos now, right? And they will show something happening. They'll say, hey, the police officer just did this was wrong. The police officer just did that, that's wrong. But these can also be used to help law enforcement investigators, right? Because when there's a crime that takes place, and not just these camera phones, but they're easy to hold, and there's something right there in your hand, and you can actually videotape what's going on. You have a right to do that. There are, unfortunately, police officers that think that you do not have a right to videotape them while they're performing their duties, and you do, literally. Let me give you this as well. A number of years ago, it's been, I think, 23 years ago, the Rodney King beating took place out in LA. Anyone remember the Rodney King situation? Yes. If we had not had that video that was taken by the guy who took that video, a lot of things happening with that police department would have kept on happening just as they were. But because it was exposed, the police department had to start doing different things, meaning they had to start policing the police better. They had to go back to the training issue. And the sheriff mentioned the idea of training. And you really need to understand that technology can help. I don't think it can hurt. I think it can only help. But it should be used to assist the law enforcement officials, not in place of law enforcement. It's nice to have cameras for surveillance and that kind of thing, but we also want the community to come back to a place where they can trust law enforcement and not have to see the tape in order to know that the law enforcement officer did what he or she was supposed to do. We should never just depend on the technology. Law enforcement officials are also honorable. We need to get back to that, where you can respect the officer and he also can respect you. The technology and depending on it alone is not a good thing.
My last question, this revolves around, if you think about it, you really rarely see discussions of race in the media or on television. And I want to pose to you guys, why is the discussion of race so uncomfortable for people?
I'll take that. I think in some ways it's the third rail of conversation, because it sort of sometimes simmers under the surface that people will say, oh, that's racially motivated or this or that, but it's very hard to have a dialogue. It's everybody, if we think of everybody here as a family, every family has things that, you know, you don't sit around the dinner table and talk about. And I think that's one of the things that is. I think that we should have those conversations. We should have frank and honest conversations to know where everyone is. When we talked about earlier, if people have a prejudice or feel like that they like one thing over another, we have to understand that, get that out. If you have it, you have it. And let's have an honest dialogue about it. And if something happens in the community or in my office or anything that happens that you feel like, I think there's a racial component to that, express it. Let's get it out. Let's talk about it. We have things that happen in our office, even internally. It's like in the family, you know, somebody will get a promotion or somebody will get a transfer, and someone will say, well, that's because she's a lady, just because she's this or that. Let's get it out. Let's talk about it. And I think that is one of the things that we need to do as a community and as a society. I think we've come a long way in having those conversations, but yeah, we need to continue it, and the more the better.
And I think going along with that, we have to have that discussion all the time, not just when there's something going on and it's so much tension. And because of that, I think because it only pops up when it's issues like this, with cases such as that, that when a lot of times people are afraid to discuss it because, you know, well, what if we have a conflict? What if we disagree? And that's okay. We're going to have a discussion, we're going to have different viewpoints, but a lot of times also, sometimes people are afraid to have those different viewpoints because so many times we'll say, oh, you don't believe that, you're racist, right? Or you don't believe that, oh, no, you don't like this race, you don't like this group. And instead of just saying, okay, we can have our opinions, we can have an open dialogue, and it doesn't have to be in these moments where it's in the media forefront and it's such a tense situation that we feel like we have to pick a side, or else we're going to be presented as a traitor or that race is
I edit all the letters that are published in the Telegraph, and I have a unique view of the racist underbelly of Bibb County and the surrounding area. I'll give you an example. One letter writer wrote last week that why didn't the newspaper, couldn't they find any white children to put in the picture? Not knowing that Hartley Elementary is 99.9% white. Now, I'm not saying that letter is racist, but obviously that person viewing that picture in our paper was looking at something other than little kids getting read a book to. It is a conversation that is very difficult on both sides because we speak different languages. I have a friend of mine, Charles Rutland, who says that white people need to have conversations with black people that they only have with white people. And black people need to have conversations with white people they only have with black people. It's because we speak past each other. And as long as we speak past each other, I don't think we're ever going to get anything accomplished.
So to be honest with you, I mean, I've heard these discussions, and I think we've alluded to it on the panel. They're usually in closed door sessions where people are apart, the groups are apart, and we really never get to the nitty-gritty or the meat and potatoes of the discussion with our counterparts or the people from the other side, so to speak. And we do need to do that. We've been having these discussions, folks, for a very long time. It's not something brand new. It's just very sad that we have to say once again that we are not talking about these issues, because we are not. And it's been generations that have not been talking about this. But let me give you this also to think about. If you could just imagine what it's like to be the other person, sometimes that in itself will lead to starting a discussion or a nice talk or conversation with someone. If you could just imagine what it's like to be that person. If you were the only female that worked or was just hired in the police department that had 264 males, and you were the only female, then all of a sudden there's another female, and then another female hired, you would feel a little more comfortable each time you had another female officer hired. But you would still feel a little uncomfortable, but you'd feel more comfortable if you had more people who were like you. So when we start talking about whether or not we are comfortable with talking to each other about our racial problems in this country, because we do have some great ones. Someone mentioned to me, 8 years ago when President Obama was hired, hey, you know, Mike, aren't you glad we got a black president? Racism is dead. And I kind of looked at him and just shook my head and says, he really does not understand. He really does not understand. And at the time that the president was elected, I remember going to the nursing home where my grandmother was. At the time, she was 92 years old. And I had taken some video and showed her on my phone. I said, we have a black president. Can you believe that? My grandmother, to this day, she passed a few years ago. She did not believe me. She did not believe me, literally. But we have to have these discussions, folks. And I think we're in the right place to do it. It tends to start on a college campus and an educational institution. But we have to be open and honest with each other. We have to heal those wounds that we've had in the past. And we still have not healed what has happened to a lot of us in the past. Some people still think, well, just forget about it and move on. We can't do that, because there's still vestiges, there's still remnants of what has happened to people, particularly black folks, what has happened to people in the past. It's very difficult to get rid of that ill feeling, especially when you are impacted every day in your life. Your everyday life is impacted always, in all ways. If the person that you pay your car note to does not look like you, The person that you pay your mortgage to does not look like you. The person that is your boss does not look like you. The person who owns a store in your community does not look like you. You begin to think, well, wait a minute, right? If you get into a little bit of trouble, but it's blown out of proportion, and someone who does not look like you gets into that same kind of trouble and is considered, oh, it's just boyish charm, you begin to say something's not right. So we're still not having the right kinds of discussions with each other, between the races, between the groups. It's just not happening.
Thank you so much, panelists. Appreciate it. I want to open it up to our audience. Do you have any questions for our panelists?
I have a question for the sheriff. Earlier you spoke about the training for excessive force. Guns. Most of these cases are people being shot. How come alternative methods aren't usually promoted? You know, like pepper spray, tasers. I noticed that the gun is usually the first thing that, or at least the only thing that they use. Why aren't other methods?
Well, the gun may be the thing that makes the news. Every time the deputy uses our defensive tactics methods to effect an arrest, that doesn't make the news. It's just a normal arrest. If he has to pepper spray somebody, that's not a newsworthy thing. If he has to use a taser on somebody, that sometimes may make the news, but not always. But whenever a deputy or law enforcement person uses a firearm, that's going to make news. And rightly so. Think about it, of all the arrests that our officers made, locally and throughout the nation, how many of them are effective, either, you may have to put your hands on them or whatever, without the use of firearms? That is a newsworthy item because it does happen and it's sensational, but it is such the smallest percentage of total encounters of law enforcement that it is newsworthy, and I think it should be. If it gets to where an officer shooting somebody becomes so commonplace that it doesn't become newsworthy, we're really, really in some problems. So that's what it is. It's not that the weapon of the gun is the first resort. It's just that when it is used, it becomes the news. They're trained in when to shoot, when not to shoot. There's things that have to be present I can give you a whole litany of when to do that. But that's that in a nutshell. That's sort of what it is. And so they're trained in all of those facets of defensive tactics, the pepper spray, the tasers, and all those things.
Any other questions? Sir.
I guess any panel member that wants to answer this question can if they want to. But we talked a lot today about there's so many African American men that are scared because they've seen people, like you talked about it specifically with your family, that have gotten killed by white police officers. And I kind of grew up with the opposite thing because when I was a little kid, my grandfather got killed by a black guy that actually lived right up the street from me. He was a police officer. And I mean, obviously I've grown and you cannot live, I don't think you can live in our generation today and not like learn to be a part of all different types of cultures and things. But it seems to me that we talk about this all the time in the criminal justice classes, and it's that there's this huge disconnect between two cultures, white and black, in this country. And how do you go from so many people that are so scared, and I mean on both sides, and find a place where things like that don't happen anymore? And I know there's not a perfect answer to that, but like, what would you say needs to happen to stop things like that from happening and people growing up with these prejudices or these fears?
I think it's interaction. I really do. Being an elected person, I sort of have to go everywhere. And there are a lot of places that I go, and I made this comment in churches and places like that, where I'm the only person that looks like me in that place, whether it be a church or a social gathering or what have you. That's where it begins, in the interaction in your neighborhoods, in the community. When you see some kids in the inner city in different places that are playing softball, playing football. Go out there and engage. Go to volunteer, to participate in the neighborhood and participate in what they're doing. That's how you sort of break the gap, because up here doing what we're doing, which is great, and look at the diversity that we have here tonight. I mean, this is great, and so that's good. But just in your everyday dealings, and I think you hit it. It is a fear. White folks, they see, black folks, they're like, I don't want to talk to them. Same way. Engage them. Channel your inner politician and go and engage people and speak to them and say, hey, what's going on? I want to help. I want to become engaged here in your community. And that's how you bridge the gap. You do it by doing it. You make that first move and start to engage.
And I think a part of that is you first have to be willing to say, all right, my initial perceptions could be wrong. Right, I'll step back. I might have, we talked about this earlier where we said we've all had that instance where we looked at someone and something came up in our mind automatically. We drew some type of judgment. But the key is that we say, okay, my perception could be wrong. I'm going to interact with this person. I'm going to communicate with them more so that I can realize there doesn't have to be this fear. There doesn't have to be this disconnect. So in order for that to happen, it's going to take effort from individuals to not just say, I'm going to communicate, but I'm going to go with an open mind and say, I could have been wrong.
And I think one of the things that you probably noticed as students is that we're wrong a lot. We look at people, we judge them by what they're wearing or how they look, whether they have dreads or not, or they have a bald head or not. and we start to judge. And I have to consciously tell myself, this is just the front part of the cover to that book. And let me open up the book and find out what's really going on with that individual, so I can learn from that individual. And I can't tell you how many times I've been absolutely, totally wrong just by looking on the outside.
And I would think that it starts with education, and not just education in a school, but also in the home. Then I also have to go back to your imagination. If you could just put yourself in the other person's position just for a few moments and consider what that person could possibly be going through. Just consider it. But then remember that you can always go back to who you really are, because that's what you look like. That's who you see in the mirror every day. But just consider for a few moments what that other person is going through. Try to imagine it, but we do lack imagination here. Then I would also say you have to have a commitment to always doing the right thing. Always. It doesn't matter what environment you're in. Always, always do the right thing. It's not going to always be popular, right? But if it's right, you know you're on the right side. You should have no fear at all. You should be able to speak truth to power. It doesn't matter if it's a newspaper, if it's a television station, if they stick a mic in your face and ask you for your opinion, give your opinion, but be open and honest about it. And if you know something that will help a police investigation, you need to help the police. We have too much of this in our communities, particularly African American communities and Latino communities and Hispanic communities, where we don't want to help the man, or we don't want to help the police because they don't like us anyway. It's not true. We pay our tax dollars. We deserve the same kinds of protection that everyone else gets. But we have to be able to open up the discussion in our homes, in our schools, and it starts with education, but also with being able to imagine yourself in another person's shoes.
Let me add this, and then this will be the end of our discussion. One thing I tell my students all the time, they hear me say this a lot. We talk about millennials. The millennial generation is the most diverse group generation that we have. And I tell them all the time, you are sitting next to someone who doesn't look like you in your class all the time. When you get out into the workforce, more than likely, you're going to be working with someone who doesn't look like you. That then lends opportunity for you to now have an opportunity to talk and work and deal with people who don't look or act like you or behave like you or come from the same culture. So when you get into the position to hire someone for a job, you get in a position where you're a law enforcement officer and you have to interact with someone who doesn't look like you have a better opportunity to interact with that person on a different level because you are now accustomed to growing up with a diverse population. So I think it all starts with the millennial generation. We are old fogies. We are probably not going to change at this point. So it's on you. You guys are what's gonna make it a little different and make the conversation of racism and racial profiling go away, if it ever does. But it's gonna start with you, I think. So, thank you so much for coming. Give a hand for our panel.